Democratic Congressman Eric Swalwell into the conversation. He's a member of the House Judiciary and Intelligence Committees. Thank you for jumping on the phone with us, Congressman. I want to ask you about something that the chairman of one of the committees on which you sit, Chairman Nadler, has said that he has informed the Attorney General that rather than expend valuable time and resources trying to keep certain portions of this report from Congress, he should work with us to request a court order to release any and all grand jury information to the House Judiciary Committee, as has occurred in every similar investigation in the past. It seems that Chairman Nadler was prepared for a less than completely forthcoming first offer from Attorney General Barr. Your thoughts?
Thank you, and good evening, Nicole. I support that. It's also in line with what happened, during the Watergate era, which was the grand jury materials were presented to the public. The public interest is so high here. We're talking about the President of the United States, the most serious investigation any president has ever been under, and to just bury that beneath the earth and never have us hear about it again would really deprive us, I think, of knowing, whether there are national security risks with how close he drew us to the Russians. Also, whether there are reforms we need to put in place so that this doesn't happen again, even if he has been cleared of criminal wrongdoing. If there was wrongdoing or vulnerabilities, in our democracy, the only way we can take action is if the Congress and the public knows.
And that seemed to be the point that the chairman of the other committee on which you sit, Congressman Schiff, was making yesterday, that to him and to most Americans, it is not okay that the son of a presidential candidate said, if it's what you say it is, Russia, I love it. I mean, is this conduct still of grave national security import to you and your colleagues on both committees?
It is, Nicole. And first, from a counterintelligence concern on the Intelligence Committee, we want to know whether any Americans sought to work with the Russians or are compromised by the Russians, but in a way that does not rise to criminal activity. And also, just because we cannot imagine, every type of wrongdoing and write a criminal law for it, doesn't mean that it makes us, less safe. And the only way to, go forward and maybe put in place new laws, and I'll just give you an example. I have written a law called Duty to Report that says if you're a federal office holder or candidate and you or your campaign are approached by an agent of a foreign power with illicitly obtained materials, you have to tell the FBI. We only learned through this investigation that so many people were approached with information by the Russians and they didn't tell anyone. And I think we all agree now there should be an obligation on a campaign to do that. So the only way to understand, what we can do to protect our democracy going forward is to fully understand what Mr. Mueller found in his investigation.
As someone who's worked on 3 presidential campaigns, I find it tragic that you need a law like that, but I'm not going to question it. Let me read you one of the 4 categories of information that you're not going to get, at least in Attorney General William Barr's first offering to you. One is material subject to the federal rule of criminal procedure. That sounds like grand jury information. Is that right?
Yes, 60 material.
So the next is material the intelligence community identifies as potentially compromising sensitive sources and methods. I was around a lot of fights for information like that around the war on terror, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. I know there's a way for you all in closed session and private ways to see that. Is that the kind of information you'll fight to see to understand the intelligence assessment?
Yes, and that's the material that I would actually agree with Attorney General Barr that may not come to light, but that there still should be oversight, and congressional leaders in both parties should understand, if there is sensitive national security material. But the other that he lays out, grand jury material or material that may hurt reputations, I think the public interest outweighs any concerns that the Attorney General has.
So that was the 4th one I wanted to ask you about. Information that would unduly infringe on the personal privacy and reputational interests of peripheral third parties. Who's peripheral here?
Well, I'll tell you who is not. Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner. I do not consider them peripheral. I consider, if it's information to protect them, then we will fight to see it. Now, if this is, someone's administrative assistant who was interviewed and asked questions about their boss and provided helpful information, I could understand why you may want to redact that person's name or any identifying information. But, if we're talking about the president's, businesses, his campaign aides, his transition team, and, contacts they have with the Russians, I think we want to know about it.
He's in front of you, in front of your committee on May 2nd. What's your first question to Attorney General William Barr?
My first question for Mr. Barr would be, does Mr. Mueller, agree with, every word in the 4-page letter that you sent to Congress? And if he doesn't, let's start there because, I am concerned, especially on, Mr. Barr saying that there is no collusion or no coordination or conspiracy. I think Mr. Mueller would probably tell us that there's no conspiracy beyond a reasonable doubt, but there was certainly evidence of it because we've seen in plain sight with the meetings at Trump Tower, the candidate asking the Russians to keep hacking, the efforts to do a Trump Tower in Moscow that were not disclosed. I mean, there's certainly evidence of collusion, and so I would like to, hear where Mr. Barr and Mr. Mueller disagree.
Congressman Eric Swalwell, thank you for spending some time with us. We're grateful.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.